Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I often heard in the pre pandemic era that data is the new currency, and it quickly changed to oxygen during the pandemic. But the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that wellness, and more importantly, holistic wellness, is not only the currency, but also the principal amount that gives us dividend for a very long time to come. I am Harshvendra Soin, Global Chief People Officer and Head Marketing at Tech Mahindra, and it is my privilege to welcome you all to our first episode of our Wellness Before Business series. We are truly privileged to have Dana Ritzcovan, Chief Human Resources Officer and Executive Vice President at News Corp, who joins us to share her insights on this extremely important subject. I'm sure that by the end of this conversation, all of us will have important takeaways to implement in our respective organizations and also as individuals. Thank you, Dana, for giving us an opportunity to host you. I'm sure we are all looking forward to a very exciting afternoon.
Thank you, Harsh. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. So I can't wait to ask you the first question. And the first question really is that with the whole pandemic situation, Dana, the concept and the complexity in what we call employee engagement or employee experience has increased exponentially. Um, what, according to you, are some of the critical things that employers and brands will need to take or need to do to promote a holistic well-being at the workplace? And since it's become so important now, we would love to hear your views on this, Dana.
Sure. The initiatives, I think, take many different forms, and employee emotional health and well-being has definitely been, as you say, at the forefront during the pandemic. To start, I think consistent leadership, messaging of support and empathy is really key. And we know that the business world is still working to reshape that narrative around mental health issues, around the stigmas that may exist in certain jurisdictions in the workplace. But I believe that every employee actually faces some sort of emotional struggle. And I think we all have to acknowledge that. And when leaders in particular are willing to address, be vulnerable, the topics openly, it creates common ground. It creates this culture of real empathy around the topic. From employees to managers to leaders to executives, it helps destigmatize the issue, I believe, by proactively really showing a willingness to support our staff who may be dealing with many of these very sensitive topics. Leaders can help employees feel more comfortable, really taking advantage of any of the programs and resources that we offer. I think if the tone isn't set from the top, many companies will see low uptake in their mental health programs with higher than normal negative effects of those who go untreated. And I think fortunately, in society lately, there has been this growing trend of business leaders really sharing their own personal struggles. After the tragic death of the CEO of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, last year, I think that really prompted other executives to open up about their own struggles. The CEO, if you recall, of Nike opened up last month even about his own struggles and highlighted the importance of corporate efforts to really destigmatize the issues. So employee well-being, in my mind, it takes supporting the whole person. That's, mental health, physical well-being, the company culture, that work environment, the engagement opportunities. It's all sort of that village of opportunity, as you think about it, that helps with the employee well-being. I think companies really need to rethink or think through holistically, not just kind of what they're offering, but how are they telling the story to employees? And a recent Korn Ferry survey, and Korn Ferry is a company that we all know very well. They started as a huge executive search firm, but they're saying now that the number one catalyst for people leaving jobs post-pandemic is culture and purpose. So if we think about that, if we really engage our employees, we can have these amazing mental health programs. We can have generous leave policies. We can have flexible work. We can have impressive employee engagement initiatives. But if we're not telling those narratives or storytelling with our employees, then I think we really lose that opportunity to engage authentically, as I think of it, with our employee base. The human side, I think, resonates deeply with our employees. It's a great vehicle for connecting people. And it's the why. It's that why part of the work that we're doing. Why are we doing this? Why are we here all the time? Many of us spend more time in the office even than we do at home. And why? Beyond that, a company's social purpose, our philanthropy efforts, our community outreach, I think that's really a lot about the why, and it can be a real motivating focus.
That's an interesting perspective you bring in, Dana. And you talked about empathy. You talked about the fact that, we see a lot of folks going through this emotional stress. And I think it's happening both professional and personal lives today. But what I really liked about what you said is the tone from the top is important. And you talked about the whole person, and especially the emphasis on culture and purpose. And we've also seen that purpose-led organization, companies with a purpose, are attracting a lot more talent than really just big brands. So very interesting and insightful points from you. And this actually brings me to my next question. From what you said, I know as a fabulous people leader, I'm sure you walk a mile in your employees' shoes to really understand the challenges that they face on the ground. So you've talked about empathy, you talked about, creating the tone from the top, but how important is practicing empathy at work for leaders, and really for also the brand that you work for, to be more accountable to their well-being and basically their employee engagement. So what is your view of the whole concept of empathy?
So I think in our jobs as senior leaders within HR, Harsh, we are often in a position where we are delivering and receiving difficult information and dealing with that complexity. So empathy, I think, plays a very critical role for us as we balance that responsibility to understand all sides of any issue. And I often say there are always three sides to every story. And I think we have to really keep an open mind to that. I think oftentimes, and I wonder if you feel the same way, leaders really feel like they're doing employees a favor by not giving them difficult or candid feedback. And I think that in reality, what I have seen is it usually ends up perpetuating the issues. Now, that also means that our employees have to be willing to receive that constructive feedback. So it's on both sides. But for managers, I think, and leaders, empathy is really important, but it doesn't negate the need for that constructive conversation. Or sometimes it involves even criticism, which is built foundationally on trust. So when the trust exists, and again, that's part of that empathetic relationship, you're able to have those constructive conversations. In fact, I think the two, the empathy and the ability to have difficult conversations, really do go hand in hand. I think difficult conversations are a part of every job, whether you're an employee, a manager, a leader, and there's always a way to have those difficult conversations and interactions with empathy and respect. Even the most difficult conversations that we have, where, probably the most difficult one is where we're letting someone go, but we can do that in a way where if it's received properly and delivered properly, it can be done with real dignity and respect. And sometimes it can help people in the future as they move on. I think we saw this play out over the course of the last year and a half during the pandemic in a number of different ways. And we thought about, how do we create this empathy with our employees, that trust. Some of the things, just to be tactical for a minute, that our business did was create in some spots of our business, a 10-hour-a-week approach where employees could sort of, quote unquote, step away. So this was during the time when many employees had their children that were being homeschooled because the schools were shut down. So we said, for 2 hours a day, step away, do whatever you need to do at home. And that's an empathetic way for leadership. I think it also builds quite a bit of trust within the workplace and loyalty as well. One of our sub companies created what they're calling a resiliency box. And that's essentially where employees could give direct feedback. They could reach out on mental health related questions in sort of a safe way. One of our divisions created what they call a kitchen table. So that was really a forum for employees to make direct outreach to HR, to communicate their needs. Some of our companies had a little bit of a lighter touch with enhanced free time, maybe summer Fridays here in the US when things were a little bit slower. We created some virtual fitness opportunities, because if we think of holistic well-being, that's mind, body, spirit. And we wanted to make sure that our people were healthy with these virtual fitness classes, meditation classes. We also deployed, and I think you have too, Harsh, the LinkedIn Learning Series, which allows people to really get engaged, develop themselves, whether it's personally, whether it's professionally, but take the opportunity to use that series. We enhanced many of our virtual connectivity channels with mental health professionals, to make sure that employees had no friction when they wanted to reach out for help in any forum. We also had to, we realized halfway through that we really did need to train our managers on managing and leading virtual teams. And maybe that's a little bit more familiar in your environment, but for us, we were very much in the office. And so it was kind of a shock to the system to have people all of a sudden be remote. We also helped employees, so that was kind of for leaders. And then on the employee front, we really wanted to help employees with tactics on how to stay connected with each other. So, when you're passing through the hallways and you see each other, that creates that opportunity for networking. So we wanted to make sure employees were conscious and proactively thinking about those opportunities to stay connected, whether that was in the form of virtual holiday parties, whether that's in the form of virtual scavenger hunts, fun things to do. We did many of those. And then we had days where, let's say a Friday, we called it the video blackout days, where we said, you know what, on Fridays, if you're going to have meetings, they're going to be calls. That way, you don't have to sit at your desk all day long. You can take the call while you're on a walk or whatever you want to do, and it's not on a video. So we know that there are many, many, especially now in what has been a crazy year and a half, unusual stressors that have popped up during this time. And what I have really learned is that this pandemic has kind of been the great equalizer or the great humanizer for many of us as leaders. It's really forced us to shift that definition of professionalism. We've gotten used to seeing each other's living rooms. We've gotten used to sometimes seeing each other's bedrooms. We've met our colleagues' family where we haven't before. I see kids pop up in the background all the time. We've been interrupted by dogs. We've been interrupted by children crying. We've been interrupted by deliveries at the front door. So it has really opened up this whole new world of the blend of personal and professional. And I think we all used to call it work-life balance. And it's more now work-life blending in some ways. But it's these small things, and they really do go a long way to creating this culture of empathy. both at the leadership and the organizational level?
That's a great answer. And I remember we have in Tech Mahindra a very important thing called reflective conversations. And it's something that all of us go through, and it's really to pause before we actually punch, or reflect before we react. And it's actually amazing how much what you said is what actually is practiced all over. But it's very, very insightful what you talked about, the fact that the line between work and life balance, because it's become so blurred in the whole virtual world. And I think that's something that at least we would like to do better. And maybe I'll take some tips from you on what you did. But clearly that's something that we are still struggling with, because it seems to blend, since we don't have traffic on the roads anymore, and we don't have to go anywhere. People think, wow, we might as well use this time and do something else. So very, 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 very insightful. Thank
I
you.
think it is interesting, Harsh, that at some point I think our employees may be working harder now, longer hours, because it has blended so much. So I do think we all need to be conscious. I'd love to hear your thoughts on a couple of things, if you don't mind. Maybe I turn the
Please,
table.
of course.
In the context of leadership, as you think about it, and we've all undergone this significant change during the pandemic, what are your views on traits, characteristics that made leaders successful?
Very interesting question. And I think clearly we've seen at least a movement or a shift from what used to be a command and control form of leadership to really one of resilience and inspiration. And clearly we have seen that some successful leaders have fallen by the wayside because the connect was not deep, emotive connect was not there. It was just because people were around you, the command and control function worked. However, I think there are a few other characteristics that we feel are important. One is extreme ownership and execution ability, because clearly the pandemic showed us that whatever BCP plans we made were not really helping us, because we never thought the whole world would go into a crisis. And therefore, the execution ability really became paramount. And I often quote a book that I read on extreme ownership, on what is the new form of leadership. And we talk about in Tech Mahindra, we talk about creating a vision, clearly showing people the end point. Because when you're really feeling low, creating a vision by a leadership or by a leader is extremely important. Second, uh, creating an ownership mindset, and we call it restaurant owners rather than just waiters, right? You have to treat as yourself as an owner of the organization. And of course, we talk about the fact that uh, we have to eliminate what we have energy vampires, and really from our everyday life, and bring in energy stars. But more importantly, at the Mahindra group level, we have what we call the rise tenets. And the three tenets, Dana, are alternative thinking, accepting no limits, and driving positive change. And they have truly come to the fore of leadership, and how you distinguish great leaders from really average ones in the times of pandemic. And with the three rise tenets, as we call them, we have certain leadership characteristics. We have five of them, but the two or three that really are so important and come to my mind straight away. One is mindfulness in the age of distraction. Today, with, and you talked about it, you have dogs barking, you have the delivery guy at the door. In India, you also have the electricity failures, by the way. You have six people to a room. Mindfulness in this age of distraction is being a very important trait in leadership post the pandemic. We also in Tech Mahindra and Mahindra Group talk about the whole new mind. So the left brain and the right brain. While logic is important, numbers are important, geography, history, creativity, music A true leader today has to be one that displays a whole mind. And and we also talk about trust. We talk about leaders being multipliers and not diminishers. And the fifth one we talk about is a leadership is clearly about learning from mistakes and allowing people to fail fast. And all of them have come to the fore. It is interesting that we've been talking about these characteristics and these tenets for years, but they really stood, uh, really, they were so helpful during this pandemic. And every time we had a doubt, we said, go back to our RISE tenets. Whenever we had doubt, we said, go back to our RISE characteristics, and we'll find the answer. So, well, in my view, that's really a big change from pre-pandemic.
That was so insightful. I was actually trying to take notes as you were talking. We'll connect afterward because I love those thoughts. And the mindfulness piece is so important as we think about, and those reminders of mindfulness. I think it's so interesting. I think I have seen, because we're so glued to our screens, it's really interesting when you're on calls or you're talking with people to see multitasking. It really becomes almost an exaggerated distraction. And I think too, I have two teenage boys, and that mindfulness with the phones and the social media is super important, I think, both professionally and personally.
That's correct.
Yeah. So tell me, as we went through these crazy times, and we're still going through them, learnings from the pandemic, Harsh, as you think about it, for you as a professional, we're talking to your fabulous large workforce. What's your advice to other HR professionals around the learnings?
Uh, Interesting question, and clearly, for us, as I call it, the new normal or the now normal, um, has really expedited the future of work. Um, we always used to talk about that the future of work is a few years away, and we suddenly realize that the future of work is here. The whole virtual environment, work from anywhere, has expedited this revolution. And while earlier, we used to think that compensation and salaries are great, but well-being, psychological safety, you said it too, a company with a purpose. So a job with a purpose and meaning is far more important to talent today. And I think all of us have learned during the pandemic that we have looked beyond our organizations, beyond our employees, into communities, into our countries, and did a lot. So the purposefulness has come to the fore. But a few non-negotiables certainly emerged, and that is one is, of course, you said it in the first question, holistic well-being. While physical well-being was always very important, I think the mental wellness part has come to the fore and become so important. One more thing that I think will be, especially for organizations like ours, which is highly complex and spread out, is the hyper personalization. We will have to treat every individual as different, and we will have to use hyper personalization, whether it's policies, whether it is approach, communication, etc. The pandemic also taught us that just mass communication or emails or were not really effective, and people reacted differently to it. um, I clearly see organizations going through a very agile org design. And I'm sure, Dana, you see it too. This whole rise of the gig workforce. And we actually have a organization which we have, it's like we're hoping it'll become a unicorn soon, but it's called Be Gig. And it's all about freelancing. It's a platform where you can actually register and then you can actually go and work for people in freelancing mode. So gig working has become huge. And how do we do purposeful work and meaningful work even during for people who are gig workers? You talked about culture being a great differentiator. How do we do this for gig workers is a true challenge. The fourth thing I would say is the whole upskilling bit. Um, Yesterday, I was getting and pushing people into a training room. Today, it's like the Coke machine. They mix their own drinks, they choose their own careers, they choose their own path. And I am a facilitator. So, upskilling in a new age is more about allowing people to make their decisions and allowing them to upskill in an area and a career that they choose. And I think that's one of the transitions that we've clearly seen. And of course, workplace optionality is big. And I wouldn't say it is work from home or work from office. Today, we have only less than 4% people around the world in the offices, and we hope it and we expect it to be like that for a considerable amount of time. But it is also about work from any place. Today, like you very rightly said, it's not strange to see somebody sitting with their kid on their in their lap. It's okay, not wrong to see somebody cooking while having a chat or running while having a chat. And I think all that has really created a different way of how professionals behave. And you asked me a question on my advice. It's a very simple advice to all professionals: is to stay curious. When we were children, we had this childlike curiosity, and for some strange reason, as we grew older and became professionals, we seem to put logical reasoning over all our curiosities. And I think I would ask all HR professionals to stay agile, and the only way to stay agile is to stay curious. So that's what I would say. And I must say that interesting questions, and I have one for you now, which I definitely want to ask you. It's true that none of us would ever want to relive the experiences during this whole pandemic. But the question to you, Dana, is: are there any silver linings that you see? Has the crisis become a catalyst for any areas that you think are becoming opportunities for you, whether it's employee engagement or any other area? So, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think, Harsh, I love your answers, by the way. It resonates so much because I think when I think about, what are the key characteristics, so many, and maybe we all call them different things, but they're generally the same. You talked about resiliency. I think of it as grit. I think it's the same thing. You talk about that curiosity. I think of it too as that intellectual curiosity. And those are, for young people in the workforce, or for anyone for that matter, those are the things that I think we look for. Obviously, there's other characteristics and, traits, but the pandemic certainly has taught us a lot. I think it really allowed us to rethink, reimagine workplace culture. What does it mean for people? And we've come to realize, so many surveys out there are saying that that employees have come to really trust their employer more than many other institutions, more sometimes than governments, more sometimes than the news they hear. We're in a news business. I'm allowed to say that, but they've really come to trust their employer as their source, their sort of source of truth. So it really was, I think, the silver lining, if there is one, is the fact that we've gained this real awareness, this knowledge, where we have opportunities to grow, to really enhance what we're offering our employees and better support our employees. I think it revealed for us areas where we needed more resources, where we needed to be more flexible than we ever had been. You can hear my dog in the background. Now that's my work-life integration, we call it. But it really did allow us that silver lining, not just of all the things, the resources, the opportunities, but also in some ways it brought us closer to our employees, where we are now a part of their personal lives, whether any of us like it or not. We do see their children. Sometimes we exchange and interact with spouses, with families. So I actually really love that opportunity to blend family and sort of that personal life. But I do think that it created these opportunities for us to enhance some of our programs. We were already focused on some of the mental health initiatives. We were moving closer to that telehealth, telemedicine avenue rather than necessarily having to be in person. But it did push us to do more in that space. We had employee assistance programs, which are really the outreach, the counseling, but we enhanced many of those. We did more around inclusive benefits, which connected our employees, whether that's elder care support or whether that's backup childcare during the times when schools were not in session. So it did offer that opportunity to really force us to focus on those initiatives. The daily communications, we did a lot more in the space of employee surveys. And those surveys used to, I think, be a once a year type initiative. And many of our businesses internally have now taken to doing that sometimes even once a week. And that's just a pulse survey, just how are our employees feeling? And I think that was, silver lining too, that we really have deeply engaged with employees. I do think it has been just a difficult time for everyone. It allowed us to sort of reprioritize, readjust our thinking. If I were going to say, silver lining, I think that's probably it. It forced us to do what we all probably should have been doing and allowed us to really get closer to our employees, their families, their personal lives.
It's an interesting thought. And what you're saying is probably the way we should have been working, that is more engaged, more at a more emotive level, I think was forced upon us through this pandemic. That's a brilliant thought, honestly.
Yes. So I have more questions for you, Harsh. Did we want to pause to take questions from the group, or should we keep going?
Yeah, I think maybe another 5 minutes and we should take some questions from the audience.
Okay, maybe before we do that, just knowing, I think what India has been going through, I'd love to just get your thoughts. And by the way, my thoughts and prayers are with your India population. We have our own India population as well. And I know that it's the second wave has been devastating in India. And severely impacted likely many of your employees, their families, their friends. How has your company really reacted to and responded to that challenge on the ground?
Yeah, it's been quite a tough time, and most of us or all of us were not prepared. When the first wave came, Dana, then we actually reacted well. We put up what we said is on the helping employees stay protected and healthy. So whether it's physical um, health, so we actually in TechM have developed a solution which is quite unique. It's called M Healthy, which is a 90% accurate diagnostic tool. It is developed from our own. It's an AI tool developed with our partners, which even if you are asymptomatic can catch it up to 90% of accuracy. So we used to use that for doing it to our people who used to come into the office at that time, or even employees and their families, because the biggest issue at that time that was stressing everybody was that we never knew who was infected because there were a lot of asymptomatic cases. We also invested a lot in insurance. We extended it to the COVID, related to COVID, any disease related to COVID or any infection related to COVID. We did everything, whether it was for families or employees, etc., or even our third-party employees in the first wave to keep them protected. The first wave went, but the second wave really caught us all napping almost. It was really something that we are not going to forget in a hurry. But the good thing was that companies like Tech Mahindra went way beyond what probably many companies did. So we actually set up, we call them quarantine plus centers in almost 8 cities, which were in partnership with hospitals. and had all facilities, including oxygen, etc. And when the country and the city ran out of oxygen, we still had enough. And it was not only, and the good thing was, it was not for our employees and their relatives alone, but it was for the communities. So we set up 50 beds, hospitals almost, in about 8 cities. We gone beyond it to the communities, whether it was making sure that people in need had medicine, people in need had food, and also the government. So we helped in the first wave, because when the relaxations were happening, they had to issue passes. So we were in the forefront helping the government, issue e-passes. Um, Vaccinations was a major concern, because the only true remedy really is people getting vaccinated. And again, at Tech Mahindra, we took the responsibility to get our people vaccinated, their families vaccinated, even the relatives and friends. So we never asked only the employee and their families, but we said, if you have some relatives and friends, let's get them vaccinated, because as a nation and as a world, we need our people to be vaccinated. Um, we set up many helplines, but what was really important is that we looked at mental wellness in a big way. We have a 24 by 7 counselors. We have an AI tool, and it's called Amigo, and it's really a friend in need. And you can call, and for any issues. And this is not only professional; this is also personal, because we clearly saw the rate of even divorces in the country go on rise. People getting stressed on working at home and working from home. So this is a help that's available free of cost to everybody. One thing that made a huge difference is, as the pandemic broke, we realized that people who were alone, it would be almost impossible to stay locked up for months. So we actually had a tool which invited people who were alone into the families of other folks in the same city, in the same locality. And there were also people who were alone, asking and bidding for people to say, okay, I'm wanting to come to your family. And we had hundreds of people, single people, who stayed with families during the lockdown period, which lasted months. Imagine if that they would have been alone, it would have been almost impossible to survive. So some interesting, innovative steps, but I think it's about basic care. It's about looking at people and saying, how can we go beyond? It's not an organization to an employee. It's really a human to another human. A lot of our touchless experiences that we had created, and this was done because we invested in technology a long time ago in HR. So you talked about employee survey. We had well before the pandemic, all our attendance is through facial recognition, and as people go do facial recognition, it also captures the mood, but it doesn't talk about individuals, but the mood of a location, because it's GDPR compliant. And in every location, we would know what the mood of the location is. Even during the pandemic, because some security guards, some emergency workers, some housekeeping staff was coming, we would still know what the situation is. We have in HR a first non-human employee called K2. It's a humanoid which we made ourselves, and it answers all queries of HR queries, which are L1, and also sort of recognizes people by face. But imagine in a pandemic where you couldn't come to office, you could call up K2, and K2 stands for knowledge and kindness. But you could call up K2, and K2 was running around, absolutely pandemic free, obviously, and could answer all your questions. So the learning is technology, which was always blamed in the past for raising an antisocial generation by creating distractions, limited time spans, weakened human interactions, actually came to the fore. And the biggest learning was, how do we continue to have a high-tech approach to a high-touch scenario? And I think that's probably a long answer, but really something that we were very, very happy to do.
Amazing thoughts, ideas. I'm so thrilled to connect with you so I can actually learn and leverage many of those Right.
Likewise, and I have one interesting question for you before I actually open it for the audience, and that is the pandemic has obviously given us a lot of time to introspect. Imagine, Dana, if for a minute you were not the chief human resource officer and executive vice president at News Corp, what would you be doing?
Hmm. Um, Look, I think that for many of us in corporate life, and I can only speak for HR, we spend a lot of time influencing and negotiating, finding solutions, thinking about different ways to do things, whether that be process or policy. And there's not kind of a tangible product at the end of a lot of what we're doing. It's much more conceptual than it is product. And it's interesting because my husband is a software engineer and he talks all the time about how satisfying it is to have a product at the end of that. He can't imagine doing the job that I do. He says all the time, "You talk so much." So I think if I were going to do something different, I have lots of hobbies. They're generally on the more creative side. I love to make jewelry. I am into painting right now. It all happened during the pandemic, by the way, and home design. So I think that if I weren't doing the job that I'm doing, I think about it in that way. Are there products that I could actually create? Because I do believe that there's probably a lot of satisfaction in doing that. Not that our jobs are not important and not that we don't have a real impact, but it's not creating a product.
Wow, that's really exciting and so talented. My God. Um, well, I'm sure you would have been equally successful in that career,
But
Dana.
wait a minute. What about you? I'm turning the question on you now, Harsh. What would you do?
Oh my God, that's not fair. But yeah, well, let me think. You know, I've always been a bit of a storyteller. I love storytelling, the power of storytelling, and believe it or not, I am actually a lawyer, also by my education. So probably I never practiced law because I went and did my MBA in HR and went this side. But I guess I would have been probably a lawyer had I not been an HR head. So I guess I'm better off being an HR head.
We're glad you're
But I love I love to interact with people and be with people actually,
here. Yeah.
and that's my passion. I think we have a few questions coming, so let me ask you the first one. It's from Abhilash Richard, and he says, "Can you share some of the best practices that are followed by the firms around the world, and this includes yours. Uh, and what are the bottlenecks in replicating these initiatives by other firms? So, any unique practice that you would like to talk about, Dana? And
Sure.
is there a
Yeah, I think one of the things that is kind of a best practice that I don't think a lot of companies think about is leverage your own internal skill sets. So, whether that is some of the things that we did at News Corp, where we recognize that we have so much internal talent. So whether it is, during the political campaigns or races, we had our news analysts talk about what they're seeing, what they predict, what they're thinking, whether it is some of our authors from HarperCollins storytelling their own books. We had a storytelling with the children of our employees, where the author of the book read their story and allowed questions from the kids. But I think it's those unique ways of sort of building within your own employee base. We had a talent show, as an example, where our CEO and I and our CFO were judges as part of that. And it was amazing to see. I mean, we had employees that were dancers, we had employees that were singers. We even had an employee who got in the top 3 who was an amazing yo-yoist. I don't know if that's what you call it, but he
yes, yes,
did a whole yo-yo um, routine. And it's amazing what you can gather through that. And it does so many different things. Again, it creates that personal professional connection. It breaks down those barriers of, what's personal, what's professional. It engages and rallies employees to feel connected to an organization and to have kind of that brand pride. I think those are really important things. So while I'm not going to say that any of those initiatives are perfect, I do think that employee engagement and gathering that culture, especially in many of our businesses that are global businesses that don't necessarily have an easy footprint to manage locally, I think those are really important ways to engage our employees and create that sort of mission, and passion and internal loyalty as well.
Amazing. I think that's wonderful. And tell me, so just the second part of the question was very interesting, and I want your views on it, because all of us know the best practices that some companies follow, but we can never copy it, because obviously there are some inherent reasons why that the organizations like yours are way ahead of the others. But any thoughts on how can we replicate? How can companies replicate best practices?
Look, I think doing what we're doing now, but this was your idea, so I give you all the credit for it. But I think just these informal exchanges, Harsh, we were talking earlier about how there are all these companies that are set up to create these networks. I think just the ability to create informally these networks where we leverage each other's, ideas, best practices. I think those are the most organic way. They feel very natural. You form that personal connection and trust between us as colleagues. You become friends. And I think that's a great way for us to do that. I'm not always so great at that because we live our busy lives and we get caught up. But I think when we are, to go back to your term, when we're mindful of those kinds of opportunities, I think we can create that ability to open those channels. I also think it's great for employees to have their networks. And many of us, create and foster the environment where we can have those employee networks. But that's also a great way, and it doesn't have to come from us, Harsh, at our level. It can come from anywhere within the organization. Great ideas are not only hatched by the most senior people. So I would encourage all employees to create your own internal network. I'm sure you have it already with colleagues that you feel close to, but exchange ideas and just make sure to get those ideas to the people that make the decisions too.
Well, that's a great insight, and I think formal and informal networks is important. Networking is a great trait, always was. So thank you for your insights. I think we are out of time, and I want to just sum up and just say that somewhere I read, Dana, very interestingly, there's a gentleman called Jim Rohn, and he had a fantastic quote which said, "Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live." So I guess we'll have to go beyond our body and take care of our holistic well-being. But thank you so much. I'm a big fan after listening to you, and I think you have some fabulous insights that you gave all of us. And once again, it's been a privilege to host you, and of course to get to know you, Dana. Thank you for all the great ideas and your thoughts that you've shared with us, and of course all the participants that are listening to us. I'm sure we'll all benefit a lot from your experience, and I look forward to staying connected. Thank you once again for taking the time out. It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you so much. The feeling is absolutely mutual.
Thank you, Dana, and have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.